Hello and welcome to Top 10 Scrat the Squirrel Moments. Today I'll be counting down the top 10 of my favorite moments featuring Scrat the Squirrel. Scrat the Squirrel is a lovable character from the movie series Ice Age. One thing you should know about Scrat the Squirrel is that Scrat loves nuts. Scrat the Squirrel is obsessed with finding nuts and then burying them in the ground. Unfortunately for Scrat, he is always greeted with some sort of grave misfortune. This leads to a comical series of unfortunate events which always leaves the audience laughing very hard. Number 10. The OG Scrat clip. This is the first time Scrat the Squirrel had ever been shown to the public. The audience is greeted with a friendly little squirrel looking for a place to plant his nut. Eventually, Scrat finds a suitable place and he slams his nut into the ice. Suddenly, Scrat the Squirrel hears a big thud and he knows he's in trouble. Then, a crack begins to travel all the way up a nearby glacier. The crack spreads all the way around and breaks off a huge chunk of the glacier. As the glacier begins to fall, Scrat realizes that he's in big trouble. He's like, uh-oh, I better skedaddle. But then he's like, oh no, my nut! And he runs back to save his nut. Then he tries and tries, but the nut just won't break free. Finally, the nut is released and the glacier is right on his tail. Scrat runs for his life with the glacier right behind him, hurling ice spikes at his face. But suddenly, another glacier comes out of nowhere. Scrat screeches to a halt and starts running to the side. As walls are closing in, Scrat slides down the hill to escape the glacier. He barely makes it, squeezing out last second as he proceeds to fall all the way down the mountain, hitting the ground a lot. As he comes falling down, he bonks him on the nut comes falling down and bonks him on the head. While most people would be sad after getting hit in the head with a giant nut, Scrat the Squirrel is thrilled to see his beloved nut again. I think that Scrat's devotion to what he loves is truly inspiring. Number 9. Scrat in Space. This clip describes how the world as we know it came to be. It opens with Scrat the Squirrel doing his usual Scrat the Squirrel things, when suddenly he falls through the ice and into this wacky cave. Eventually, he discovers that he's actually inside a giant alien spaceship. As he tries to get his nut unstuck from the steering wheel, he sends a ship flying into outer space. He crashes into a planet sending him into orbit. As the clip continues, Scrat the Squirrel continuously finds himself in unfortunate circumstances. One of my favorite moments is when Scrat gets wrecked by this door. Just when he thinks he's safe, the door smashes him again. Then his nut gets stuck behind 9 more doors. Eventually, Scrat the Squirrel ends up stuck in space without his nut forever. This is so sad. Can we hit 12 likes for Scrat the Squirrel? Number 8. Scrat gets DE_destroyed by a bird. In this clip, Scrat the Squirrel climbs to the top of a bird's nest and finds his nut. At the top of the nest, he finds a baby bird hatching. The vicious bird lunges for Scrat's nut, and the two engage in an epic battle to the death. Just when Scrat the Squirrel thinks he is victorious, the baby bird's parents show up, and he is very angry. Uh-oh, Scrat, you're in trouble now. Number 7. Scrat got stuck. Scrat the Squirrel is scurrying around a frozen lake when he finds a nut stuck underneath the ice. He stomps on the ice to get the nut, but then he gets stuck underneath the ice. Oh no! As he tries to get the nut back, he sends the nut flying away. He swims underneath the ice to get his nut back, but then he pokes his nose to the ice so he can breathe, but the nut gets sucked into his nose and he can't breathe. He spits the nut out and sticks his head through the ice. And then he carves the ice out with his teeth and awkwardly waddles over to the nut. Unfortunately, the nut is just out of reach and he knocks it off a cliff. Then Scrat falls off the cliff and sends the nut flying onto a tall ledge. What a bruh moment. Number 6. Scrat creates the continents. One day, Scrat the Squirrel was just scratching around as usual, and he finds a nice spot to plant his nut, and then he slams it in the ground. He feels the ground starts to shake, so he quickly takes the nut out and covers the hole back up. Then he moves over a little and tries again. As soon as the nut touches the ground, the earth opens up beneath him and he falls all the way to the center of the earth. He eventually smacks down on the Earth's core, which is a big ball of floating metal. As Scrat takes one step, there's a giant crack in the Earth's surface. But then his nut starts to get away. As Scrat chases his nut around the Earth's core, he creates Australia, Africa, giraffes, Italy, and other famous landmarks. Finally, he catches his nut and gets flung all the way back to the Earth's surface. As he falls toward the ocean, he prepares to dive in, but then he smacks his face against the iceberg. At least he has his nut. Oh no! Number 5. Scratlantis. As Scrat wanders through the ocean, he stumbles into this wacky nut-shaped island. He runs ashore and smacks his face on the ground. But then he is greeted by another squirrel wearing a toga.
Welcome, brother. Behold, Scratlantis.
This crazy tall squirrel shows him around the city of Scratlantis. Scrat is overjoyed by the sheer amount of nuts on this island. Eventually, he spots a giant nut in the center of the island.
No! Stop! Brother, rise above this base desire. Be more than a rodent.
But Scrat starts going into withdrawals and can't help but take a nut for himself. As he yanks out the nut from the hole, he hears a flushing sound and realizes that the nut was keeping the island afloat. The entire island sinks to the bottom of the ocean, leaving Scrat in a crusty, dry desert in the middle of nowhere. Number 4. Scrat meets his girlfriend. One day, Scrat is scurrying around when he spots a nut on a nearby ledge. When he gets to the ledge, he notices that the nut is gone. He sees some movement behind a tree and sneaks around to see what it is. Behind the tree, he finds a beautiful girl squirrel. Scrat is in love at first sight, but then he realizes that she stole the nut on the ledge. He hides behind a tree and tries to steal the nut back without getting noticed, but then they both grab the nut at the same time. Their eyes lock for a moment, but then Scrat yanks the nut out of her hand and stomps off. What a rude dude. However, Scrat hears her crying and feels bad for what he did, so he decides to give it back. But Scrat's instincts take over, and he just can't give her the nut. Then Scrat absolutely destroys that thought, and then he realized what he did, and so he jumps off the cliff to save her. They both grab on the nut and their eyes meet in this heartwarming scene. But then the girl squirrel deploys her wings and flies away with the nut, and Scrat is left to fall to death all by himself. What a prank. Number 3. No time for nuts. One day, Scrat is wandering around when he runs into this wacky light under the snow. He gets curious and digs out this old time machine. Then the time machine zaps his nut and sends it away. Scrat is furious and he shakes the machine because he is very angry. Suddenly, he and the nut are found in a green field with the nut stuck under a rock. As Scrat tries to free his nut from the rock, he spots the sword shimmering in the distance. He picks up the sword and uses it to get the nut out, but then he is attacked by a storm of arrows. He uses his Jedi Master's skills to deflect all the arrows and knock out the nut. It keeps sending more arrows. Eventually, Scrat runs up the tower and hides in this weird tube thing. Then he hears a hissing noise. Turns out the weird tube thing was actually a cannon, and Scrat flies through the air, and he flies through the air. Then he notices a volley of arrows in the distance closing in on him. He quickly uses the time machine to teleport the nut and himself to safety. Then he finds himself in the middle of a giant coliseum. Scrat the Squirrel spots his nut and runs over to go pick it up, but then he gets dragged away by a chariot. He gets dragged all the way to the Coliseum, but then he hits a rock, and he goes and reclaims his nut. As the trumpets blow, he stands proud in victory. However, the trumpets meant that they were actually releasing the beast, and Scrat hurriedly teleports himself away. He finds himself back home in the snow, but then he hears a rumbling in the distance and spots the Titanic barreling towards him, and he is on the iceberg. He tries to run away, but it's too late, and he gets squashed by the iceberg. Then he and the nut teleport away. Whoa, this is wacky. Scrat fights with himself over the nut, but then the nut teleports away, and Scrat gets wrecked by himself. Then he gets teleported underneath a launching rocket. Then he robs a bank, and he does a bunch of other weird wacky stuff. Now Scrat finds himself stuck in a time vortex. He spots his nut in the distance and scrambles towards it. He starts getting sucked back into reality, but grabs the nut last second. When he wakes up, he finds himself next to a giant oak tree full of nuts. But then, he bumps the time machine and it starts to charge up again. But not this time. Scrat destroys the time machine so he can stay with this oak tree forever. He climbs the tree and grabs the nuts, but they just won't budge. He climbs down the tree and discovers that the tree is actually a fake memorial for the last oak tree in the world. Then Scrat remembers that he still has a nut from the time vortex. He hops over to pick it up, but the time machine sends the nut away one last time, leaving Scrat stranded in the future forever with no nuts. Number 2. Scrat goes sicko mode. In this clip, Scrat slides down a ramp to get his nut down from a ledge. He falls into the water and finds himself surrounded by vicious piranhas. As he scrambles onto the land and dodges a bunch of piranhas. Eventually, one chomps on his nut. This is when Scrat goes absolutely ballistic. Number 1. Scrat goes to heaven. Here we find Scrat climbing to the top of a big basin full of water. The main cast of the movie are about to drown because all the rising water, but then Scrat saves the day by cracking open the basin and releasing all of the water. Unfortunately, Scrat gives his life for this stunt. You did good, Scrat. It was an honor. Later, Scrat wakes up in a cloudy dreamland and bumps his head into the pearly gates of heaven. He finds himself wandering through hills of clouds laced with nuts. In the distance, he sees the biggest, most beautiful nut he's ever seen in his life. He frolics towards the nut with glee, but right as he's about to touch it, he starts getting sucked back to Earth. Scrat wakes up to the sight of him being resuscitated by Sid the Sloth. Ew. Then Scrat realizes that Sid was the one who took him from heaven back to earth, and he goes absolutely sicko mode once again.